All right, so last night we had the vice presidential debate between Tim Walz and JD Vance. It was interesting. It was nice to see, even though JD Vance didn't answer any questions, it was nice to actually see a real debate where not too many crazy things happen. It was nice to see like a civil conversation, even though the conversation maybe wasn't the greatest at times. It was nice to actually see something not with Donald Trump in it. So that was a positive. And in today's video, we're going to go over the recent CNN poll that came out post debate. Now, this isn't a big poll, it's a small poll, but there is a bit of information that we can get out of this, which is definitely beneficial for the Harris Walz campaign. So we're going to delve into that. But before we get into that, I want to talk about the debate itself, just from my point of view, just some of the observations that I noticed. I got my iPad here where I went ahead and put down a few notes about the debate. Now, one thing I noticed with JD Vance, and I guess Republicans in general, is they never had any ideas about what they're going to do to solve things, right? They only talk about, we're going to get rid of this, we're going to get rid of this. They don't talk about what they're actually going to pass to try to make things better. I mean, when we look at what Tim Walz said in the Harris campaign, you talk about the house down payments, child tax credits, other things like that, family leave, whatnot. And that was an accomplishment, I think, for the Harris Walz campaign, was to talk about the ideas they had. All JD Vance was saying, they're bad, they're bad, they're bad. And that's what the Republican mantra basically is just to say, everything that the Democrats do is bad. We don't have any ideas, but everything that the Democrats do is bad. And this is why whenever pushed on certain issues, I think one of the big things that the pundits talked about after the debate was just JD Vance's lack of being able to answer the questions. So that's one thing that I noticed. It seemed like the Democrats were more issues focused, whereas it was just the typical Republican, let's just bash the Democrats for anything, but not come up with our own ideas. Another thing too, and this is something I really noticed throughout the campaign or the debate, and one thing I did notice, I think was funny, but even though it's technically correct, I noticed that JD Vance called Donald Trump his running mate. Usually running mate is kind of like the VP spot, so I'm just kind of wondering how that made Donald Trump feel. But I want to go to the closing statements that both of the candidates made. And I went ahead and jotted down some words that I noticed that kind of encompasses the messages that they had. So let's go ahead and start with Walz. So the things I heard Walz say was talking about coalition building, optimism, better, opportunity, freedom, afraid, forward, joy, prosperous, center, and thrive. So these were like some of the key words that I heard from Walz's closing statement. Now, when it came to JD Vance, I heard more rich, prosperous, safe, policies, great country, American dream, and change. So it did seem like they are bringing that change thing, the American dream idea and stuff like that. I think with these types of messages, you had Walz talking about freedom. You had JD Vance talking about the American dream. They're trying to both interject that patriotism, because I think definitely for the Democrats, they have been able to take that concept of patriotism and make it even, because I think for many, many years, the Democrats did not have a real grasp on that. Now, this was another thing that I found interesting, is I wanted to see how many times they mentioned Donald Trump or Kamala Harris in their closing argument. So for Tim Walz, he mentioned Kamala Harris, or using the pronouns like she or her, 7 times. When it came to Donald Trump, he mentioned Donald Trump 7 times. Now, when it came to JD Vance, he mentioned Kamala Harris 8 times, but only mentioned Donald Trump once. And another thing that JD Vance said throughout his debate is he kept on saying I, where you see a lot of what Walz said was we. Even when talking about Minnesota, he was talking about we in Minnesota did this, we in Minnesota did this, not I did this, I did this. And that was a huge problem that I had with Joe Biden. He kept on saying I. JD Vance kept on saying IDI, I, right? Now, I don't know about you, but purely for me, I felt like JD Vance was trying to run for president more than he was running for vice president. I think he was trying to put himself out there and let people know who he was instead of knowing, really defending Donald Trump. Because he even said one line that I found interesting. He says, "I don't agree with Trump on everything." Now, Donald Trump is a person that wants everyone to agree 100% with what he thinks. That comment made him just flip, right? And it just seemed like to me in this debate that JD Vance was campaigning for 4 years from now, maybe throwing Donald Trump under the bus a little bit. He never really talked about Trump. It was more about himself and against the Democrats, whereas Tim Walz really did talk about Kamala Harris, Walz, what they're going to do. This is why I think it was basically a slam dunk debate as far as what you were trying to accomplish. Now, a lot of people might talk about winners or losers, but there are some numbers that we're going to talk about right now with the poll that really shows, I think, that the Democrats got the upper hand from this debate, though I don't think it's really going to matter in the grand scheme of things, because when they asked people in this debate, did this actually change your mind? Of those people polled, 1% said it changed your mind. Okay, we're just in this deadlock electorate right now, so there's not going to be any change. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the CNN poll, and let's look at the overall number of who won. Now, if you look at who won the debate, basically, you can't get more of a tie than this except for 50-50. So if you're the Harris and Walz campaign, I think this is the type of story you were looking for, because everyone had the higher expectations for JD Vance and the lower ones for Tim Walz. And I think this poll right here, making it 50-50, says, that's exactly what we wanted. It didn't show JD Vance really in the lead, winning this debate. Now, what's going to be interesting are the post-debate polls, the regular polls, because these are a snapshot poll done by text immediately after the debate, just that spontaneous reaction. Once the news cycle starts to simmer, it will be interesting to see how people's opinions change on everything regarding this poll. So in about 4 or 5 days from now, when we get the post-debate polls, those are the ones that we'll see how that actually had an effect. But in this snapshot, it does look like it is an essential tie. So let's go ahead and look at some of the other questions that we had asked in this poll. So if you know anything about my channel, you know that it's these kind of questions that I think are really the most important, more in touch with your needs. They asked the respondents this, and 48% said that they felt that Tim Walz was more in touch with their needs than JD Vance was. And then when we look at shares your vision of America, it's essentially the same. We have Tim Walz at 48% and JD Vance at 39%. So it's these intangibles. Everyone talks about issues and stuff like that. And if you watch my channel for a while, you know that I'm not a huge person when it comes to issues. So in this situation, I think that Walz actually he hit where he needed to hit to show that contrast between the Harris-Walz campaign and the Trump-Vance campaign. And it seems like more people actually have more confidence in the vision and where the Walz campaign or the Harris and Walz campaign want to go compared to the Trump campaign. So let's go ahead and look at the favorability ratings, because this, I think, is a big one. All right, so if we look at JD Vance pre-debate, you could see he had a big problem. He was 22% underwater, 52 unfavorable to 30 favorable. But once you look at the post-debate, his favorability rate went up significantly, up to 41%, and his unfavorability rating went down to 44%. So he's still underwater, but I think he did a lot of good in helping his reputation in this debate. Again, for many people, this is the first time that they've actually seen him. Now, when we look at Tim Walz, it's kind of the same thing. This was the first time that anyone had really seen him on a debate stage in a situation where he actually had to answer questions spontaneously. We can see pre-debate, the people that they sampled here had a 46-32 favorability rating of Tim Walz. So a 14% above water, which is pretty darn excellent for any candidate at all in today's political climate. But once the debate finishes, You see his favorability in this jump to 59%, plus 13%. I mean, these are favorability ratings that you see for Barack and Michelle Obama, and sometimes they don't even get that high. This is an amazing thing. And he shed 10% off his unfavorability rating amongst this group down to 22%. So having this huge ocean of a gap that he is totally, he's hovering above the water in this case. He's totally above water. So as you can see, the favorability rating just went through the roof. And this is going to be a big thing for Democrats. If you had two candidates who are above water when it comes to favorability rating, that to a point almost can become unstoppable. Almost. Now, we are in an era now where unfavorability ratings are just handed out left and right, and the rare commodity is being above water in favorability ratings. 20 years ago, you did see these big favorability ratings. And then pretty much in 2010, you just started seeing everything become unfavorable, unfavorable, unfavorable. So for both of the Democratic candidates to currently be above water, and Walz has been above water, this just goes ahead and throws him, launches him into space as far as his favorability rating. We'll see if that happens and continues throughout these other polls that we see post-debate, the regular polls. But the snapshot was, wow, we like this guy. You would do anything. You would pay anything to have a 59% favorability rating, especially after a debate, okay, where you could have the possibility of absolutely screwing it up. Now, let's go ahead and look at one other question that they had, and that was about, do you think people are fit to run for office? And I did this last because it wasn't really the one that had much of a change. Now, I did say fit for office, but I meant qualified to serve, so just want to make that little correction here. So you can see with Tim Walz, 65% of Americans said yes, 35% said no, and that 35% will just be the MAGA hardcores that we have overall. Now, when we look at J.D. Vance's numbers, they are 58% to 42%. Now, this, again, wasn't too much of a change from what we saw pre-debate. So most of these numbers have pretty much stayed basically where they are. People have more confidence in Tim Walz's qualification to serve than they do J.D. Vance's. So at the end of the day, we always focus on the who won the debate number, which to me, kind of like the horse race numbers in a lot of polls, mean absolutely nothing. It's this underlying data that we have that really give us the meat and potatoes of what's really happening with the electorate. In this case, that number of a 59% approval rate. When I saw that poll this morning, 59%, I mean, I haven't seen that much of a jump in a while, and we'll see if that is reflected in later polls, because they talked about how Kamala Harris in, I think it was the NBC poll or one of these polls recently, that her favorability went up the highest percentage since George W. Bush, since 9/11. I'm interested to see how high Tim Walz's go up and see if he can actually eclipse that. If you're a campaign, and you're running for president, you want two candidates that people really like. Clinton Gore. People really like that combination, right? So this is what you want to strive for, especially in a day where we just have a toxic political climate, where you have so many double haters that it's almost impossible for somebody to get above water. All right, so I just wanted to go over the debate a little bit, over this poll that we had from CNN. I think it looks really, really good for the Democrats. Let's see what other polls say afterwards. We do have some early voting now coming in, and there's some good news and some bad news for Democrats. We'll get into that later today, but thank you very much for joining me. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Again, even though it's yesterday, happy birthday to Jimmy Carter. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.